Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to my alphabet of favourite film series, and today we're talking about the letter K. So as always, please leave your list of your favourite films for the letter K in the comments below, because I really enjoy reading them, because again there'll be films that I haven't seen, and that will prompt me to add them to the watch list or buy list, to add to my beautiful big backlog. Or there'll be films that are simply forgotten, and it's only after the video and after I read the comments that I go, why did I not include that one? So please leave your comments and your lists below, because I really do enjoy reading them. So let's begin. Hopefully it won't take that long. The first film is Kagemusha by Akira Kurosawa from 1980. This is the 180-minute version, not the 160-minute international cut, which I had for years and thought that was the definitive version until I got the Criterion DVD and now the Criterion Blu-ray, which is 180 minutes, which fleshes it out in more ways than one. It's a story starring the wonderful Tatsu Nakadai as he plays a lord and also the thief who acts as his double when the lord dies. It's about human hubris. It's about artifice. Kurosawa goes from being one of the most dynamic users of the camera to a very static camera for this and Ran, but he's still able to create these terrible, haunting tableaus of human stupidity and tragedy, especially in Ran. His use of colour is fantastic. You could argue it's perhaps a little long. You could argue that the score is a little bit obtrusive at times. But if you compare something like Akiru, which has some level of hope, even though he knows what people are like, to Kagemusha and Ran, which are just completely bleak, but bleak in a wonderful way. So that's Kagemusha, a Japanese film. The next two films are also Japanese. Takeshi Kitano's Kid's Return and Takeshi Kitano's Kikujiru. Kid's Return is arguably his best film without Kitano in it. You could argue Dolls, but I think Kid's Return's perhaps slightly better. And Kikujiro is just a wonderful, typical Kitano humour road movie, as a small boy is dumped on this guy to look after, and they get into various adventures. Kid's Return is about two kids, strangely enough, who grow up. One goes down the route of boxing, another one goes down the route of joining the Yakuza, and how they meet up and go back to their school. And it's just a wonderful, nostalgic kind of film. Don't know how much it's based on Kitano's life, but again, both films have that Kitano use of colour, that Kitano editing style, where you always think his films are more violent than they actually are, because most of the violence is actually in the cut. And both films, well, Kikujiro perhaps more so, will put a smile on your face. But Kid's Return is a really assured, nice little film as well. Again, if you're new to Kitano, these perhaps aren't the two films to jump straight into. Maybe Sonatine or Violent Cop, or certainly Hanabai, are probably the ones to jump into. But if you're used to Kitano's pacing, if you're used to Kitano's editing, and if you're used to Kitano's somewhat skewed sense of humour, then there's a lot of pleasure to be had from Kikujiro and Kid's Return. So next in the list is The Killer by John Woo. This is the Nova Media Blu-ray release, which is very nice. You get a nice embossed Chow Yun-fat. Who doesn't want an embossed Chow Yun-fat? The Killer was the second John Woo film I ever saw. It's probably my favourite John Woo film, because after seeing Hard Boiled, which featured in the letter H, and literally being blown away by it, it's one of those few films that's literally jaw-dropping, then you automatically go and watch The Killer, which is even more jaw-dropping. There's this beautiful poetry about the ballistic ballet. Again, Danny Lee and Chow Yun-fat have one of those strange John Woo relationships, calling each other Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck or Dumbo, depending which cut you watch. It's explosive, it's about honour and betrayal, and it's got lots of shooty bang bang. Again, The Killer and Hard Boiled, and perhaps A Better Tomorrow too, are finest John Woo films, and he never really translated that into Hollywood, because again, Hollywood kind of did the usual thing which they do with foreign filmmakers. They say, we really like what you do in your kind of home country films, we really want you to do that, but not quite. That's why the exception maybe Face Off, he never had that same kind of balletic, poetic use of guns like he does in his Hong Kong actioners. So that's The Killer. The word kill will feature quite a lot in this list. The next two are The Killers and The Killers, which I've included because if you could merge them into one film, it would be one of the greatest films of all time. These two are still very good, but again, if there was a merging that happened, it really would be fantastic. The 1946 one, directed by Robert Siodmak, is my favourite version, starring an early Burt Lancaster, and it starts so beautifully with two shady characters looking for somebody, and they just go up and shoot him and he just accepts it, and then we kind of see in flashback why he is so accepting of his fate. It's a beautiful film. And then we have the 1964 version by Don Siegel, starring John Cassavetes in the Burt Lancaster role, and Lee Marvin as one of the hitmen. And Lee Marvin steals the show. I mean, if Lee Marvin was in the earlier version, it would be absolutely fantastic. Bizarrely, Ronald Reagan plays one of the bad baddies, and it's really funny because Lee Marvin apparently couldn't stand him because he just viewed him as being really fake. Lee Marvin, wonderful judge of character. This was originally meant for the TV, but it was deemed to be too violent for the TV, so they then got a cinematic release, and that's why it does kind of look like a TV movie. but in some way that kind of enhances it bizarrely. So the killers and the killers, again, you can watch them back to back and then make your own version with the amalgam of the two. And continuing with the killing theme, it's Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. This is the Arrow release that also has Killer's Kiss. So The Killing is Kubrick's third film, and it's the first film in his canon that you go, wait a minute, this guy might be quite good. Obviously a huge influence on Reservoir Dogs. If you take The Killing, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, they are huge influences on Reservoir Dogs. Again, it messes about with time. It's got a great Sterling Hayden performance. The heist is handled really well, but obviously things go awry, and it has one of the best endings of any heist movies. Again, Kubrick's early use of the frame mixed in with stock footage, the way he did in Doctor Strangelove, works really well, and it's a fun little early Kubrick. The Killing. Then the final film with the word killing or kill in it is Yorgos Lanthimos' The Killing of a Sacred Deer. If you followed this channel for any time, you might kind of know that I do think Lanthimos is arguably the best filmmaker in the world at the moment. Perhaps Kim Ji-woon. But Lanthimos, he has just a wonderfully unique style. Strangely enough, talking about Kubrick, some of Lanthimos' ideas, his use of the frame, kind of reminds me of Kubrick a little bit, especially on The Favourite, which featured in the letter F. The Favourite does kind of remind me of Barry Lyndon quite a lot. But Killing of a Sacred Deer stars Nicole Kidman and Colin Farrell. And Colin Farrell's a doctor who has befriended the son of one of his patients, and it all goes very strange, but again it has that Lanthimos people talking in a very flat manner. I do kind of like filmmakers and films that people either love or hate, and Lanthimos, I don't think there's much middle ground with Lanthimos, but I just think he's wonderful. The Killing of a Sacred Deer perhaps isn't such a masterpiece as The Lobster, which is one of my personal favourites. I think it's one of the best films of the last 25 years. Or The Favourite, and it might actually be a little bit forgotten because it's between The Favourite and The Lobster. But Killing of a Sacred Deer is just wonderful. There's really uncomfortable moments, but again it's just shot beautifully. It's shot in this kind of clinical, kind of clean way, and it does have the humour that is in Lanthimos films if you just know where to look for it. Killing of a Sacred Deer, it's very good, but if you don't like Lanthimos, it's probably not very good. I also briefly thought about putting Lanthimos' film Kineta in, which is his first film, which is about three characters who recreate murders in their local town. But again, Lanthimos being Lanthimos, nothing's explained, so you just have these three characters wandering about the landscape and abandoned hotels and stuff. It's just very strange. So I've not included it in the list, but I just thought I'd let you know about it because it's well worth checking out, even though it's a little bit oblique even for Lanthimos. So next on the list, it's an Ealing comedy, Kind Hearts and Coronets. This one is one of the best comedies about mass murder, directed by Robert Hamer, starring the wonderful Dennis Price, who's never been better than he is in this. And Alec Guinness plays the 8 members of the same family, but again, he just doesn't put on a different wig. He does actually give you 8 little wonderful different characters. I mean, I still don't know how they got away with it really, because it is essentially about mass murder, and you're kind of on Dennis Price's side, so you're actually rooting for him to cut a swathe through Alec Guinness's family. The Chalfonts. It's a wonderful little film. I've always preferred this to The Lady Killers. And in this edition by Studio Canal is quite beautiful. There's lots of lovely extras, and it's just a great little film. Kind Hearts and Coronets. Next on the list is arguably my second favourite Scorsese film. Sorry, I almost got carried away there. It's The King of Comedy. As the years go by, this is just more and more relevant. Allegedly, De Niro perhaps directed some of this because Scorsese was still recovering from drug addiction and such things. It does kind of have the look of a TV movie. It doesn't quite have that big budget movie epic feel. It's very claustrophobic. It's very uneasy, which suits De Niro's character of Rupert Pupkin. Jerry Lee Lewis, probably in his best performance. Jerry Lewis is a completely different person. Great Balls of Fire. Jerry Lewis, without Dean Martin, in a career best performance as a really twisted and grumpy TV talk show host, and also Rupert Pupkin is the sad comedian who desperately wants a spot in the show. And what's brilliant about it, apart from De Niro's performance and Jerry Lewis's performance and Sandra Bernhardt's performance, is the fact that when he does get his spot and we actually hear his material, because throughout the film you're thinking, oh no, his material is going to be, offensive, he's going to be, but when you actually hear his material, he's just as mediocre as every other, TV comedian. He's just as safe and as bland as all the other ones. I mean, Michael McIntyre probably stole some of Rupert Pupkin's material, and that's the genius of it, the fact that he is literally just as bland and mediocre as all the other TV comedians. It's a great film. Like I said, it's probably my second or third favourite Scorsese film, because as you may have known, I've kind of fallen out of favour with Scorsese. But The King of Comedy is an essential Scorsese film, however much he directed or didn't direct it. Next on the list is arguably my favourite Abel Ferrara film, King of New York with Christopher Walken. Not just because Christopher Walken's actually got a starring role, which doesn't happen that often. This is sleazy and nasty and quite wonderful, with a cast you just couldn't make it now. It would be far too expensive. With Christopher Walken and Steve Buscemi and Lawrence Fishburne and Wesley Snipes and David Caruso. Okay, technically he wouldn't cost that much money. It's just wonderful. Christopher Walken's Frank White coming out of prison to reclaim his throne. It's just sensational. It's messy, but it's just Walken's performance is just magisterial. He's just so fantastic in it. King of New York. If you've never seen King of New York, highly recommend it. Yeah, it's Abel Ferrara at his best. Christopher Walken is one of his most chilling yet suave performances. Next on the list is Kiss Me Deadly by Robert Aldrich. Again, one of those films from 1955 that you go, how did they get this made? This is a weird film. It's also a really dark film. Anybody who's a fan of Pliers will know that. Yeah, it's, you know, Ralph Meeker as Mickey, Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane's very jaded detective. It involves things nuclear. It's just a weird, strange film from 1955, and again, I don't really know how they got away with it. But 60 odd years later, it's just still essential, still hard as nails, and still strangely off kilter. Kiss Me Deadly. Next on the list is Night Riders by George Romero, which again is a really strange little film. This is allegedly, or was, George Romero's favourite film. It's certainly his most personal. It stars a young Ed Harris as a leader of a group of people who reenact kind of King Arthur and knights, but on motorcycles. They do jousting events and things like that, and they just travel the country getting into adventures. It's about kind of keeping your principles. It's about not selling out, and again, that's something very close to George Romero's heart. It's perhaps a little long, but watching it again, it is a lovely little film, and you can tell that Romero loved the subject matter and it meant a lot to him. And Ed Harris gives a great performance. There's a nice interview with him when he tries to remember what actually happened. From 1981, and again, it's one of those Romero films that's perhaps forgotten about. Again, it's another film that I saw on BBC Two's Moviedrome a long time ago, and I hadn't seen it for years. But I think it does actually stand up very well. Again, perhaps a little overlong. And it's also got perhaps Tom Savini's finest performance as the Black Knight. Next on the list, we're getting there, there's not too many left, is a modern film. I'll just let that sink in for a second. It's a modern film. It's Kubo and Two Strings, which is just a beautiful little animated film with a wonderful animation style that's not Pixar. And again, it's kind of set in medieval Japan, so it's in my wheelhouse. It's just a lovely little story about a boy trying to find his past. Again, the animation style is beautiful. On Blu-ray, on a big screen, it's just wonderful. It's a film for all the family, and I don't say that much. Next on the list is just about the only late Scorsese that I actually have. It's Kundun. This is the closest Scorsese, well, perhaps not, but it's certainly one of the films that Scorsese, you can feel his love for Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger come through. This is, again, only Scorsese at that point in his career could probably get away with making this, because it is an almost completely expressionistic film. Use of music and colour and camera movement kind of replace narrative storytelling. It's just a beautiful film about a young Dalai Lama, but the plot's almost not important. It's just beautiful, and it is kind of a major film by a major filmmaker who isn't really that bothered about the narrative. It is about camera move, colour, music, and how that makes you feel. Again, when it's all said and done, Kundun will probably be forgotten about in Scorsese's canon, but it probably shouldn't be, because it is a beautiful film. And last, but no means least, it's Kwaidan by Kobayashi. Again, I really need to pick that up in Blu-ray. Criterion Region A has it. This is Eureka Masters of Cinema DVD. Spine number 29, if anybody's counting. This is a ghost story. This is the full 183-minute version, because there was versions with one of the episodes cut out. And again, they're not particularly scary or whatever. They're just beautiful and haunting, especially the one featuring the character on the cover. Again, it's another film that's expressionistic. It's shot on sets. There's beautiful coloured backdrops and painted backdrops. So there is an artificiality about it, but for some reason that just enhances it. And on the big screen it is quite an overwhelming experience. And it's quite wonderful. So if you haven't seen it, I'm not going to give away any of the stories. You'll have to find it for yourself if you haven't seen it. But it's just a wonderful film and something different from Kobayashi. So thank you very much for watching. That wasn't that long. But again, please do include your list for your favourite films beginning with the letter K, because no doubt I'll see some of the lists and I'll go, oh, I haven't seen that one, I'll have to check that out. Or, you idiot, you've forgotten that one, and I'll almost want to redo the video. But I'll save you that, I won't redo the video. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again for the letter L. I believe that is next after K. So thank you very much for watching. This is Solitude Ronan saying farewell.